And so a welcome again to a international and intra-provincial gathering of people interested in the conversation of loss and grief. I'd have to say it's actually my very favorite topic, not because of the kind of morbid side to grief that our culture holds, but because of the deep human element of grieving. It's almost universal. I don't know if I can say it's completely universal. There might be certain kinds of human wiring that don't allow for the experience of grief, but I would just say most of us humans grieve. And because of that, we share something deeply soulfully in common with each other. So tonight's conversation is going to be inherently countercultural, subversive, in the sense that North American culture still struggles to be comfortable with sorrowing as a quintessential human state. We still want to fix it or push it to the back room. And so this evening we're going to have a conversation that's open and frank and explores loss and the grief that it evokes as something that is deliciously transformational, often, if not always, painful and frightening, overwhelming, and has the potential for deepening us. I invite you just for a moment to sit back in whatever land you are situated upon and just be aware, just for a moment, of the land beneath your feet. It might be paved, it could be concrete, it might be wilderness. The organization I work with, Bow Valley Palliative, is situated in the traditional lands of Treaty 7 and Métis District 4. And we are on a land that has been the inheritor of the footsteps and the hearts of people for thousands of years. And I do want to name for us this evening the Inyare Nakota, the First Nations that include the Bears, Pachinikin, Goodstoney, the Blackfoot Confederacy Nations, and that includes in southern Alberta, the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, and the Tsuut'ina. For us, wherever we are, California, New Zealand, Ontario, Alberta, BC, maybe other places not mentioned, the land beneath us holds us. And so we want to honor the spirit of the land, that it does protect us, it nurtures us, it holds us to the earth. And we give thanks for the first peoples of our areas, wherever we are, that we're stewards of the land in adherence to natural law. And the values of natural law are love, courage, wisdom, respect, honesty, humility, and truth. Those qualities take us into our conversation this evening. Just for a quick reflection within yourselves, what does your culture think about loss and grief? And by culture, I might mean Canadian culture, American, New Zealand, or maybe it's the culture of your birth if you came from another country. What did that culture think about loss and grief? Oops, sorry. What is your personal relationship to grief? And again, I'm not looking for a response from you, but just looking to stimulate our thoughts a little bit. Our culture has a relationship to loss and grief. We have our own relationship to grief. What did you learn regarding grief from your family? And you can see the questions are honing in. We go from the broader perspective of what did our culture or society teach us? What relationship did we form? And then we ask that family of origin question. When I was growing up, and my teen years and my early adult years, and currently, how does my family interact with grief? And this conversation begins from the perspective that Canadian culture has been strongly grief averse, and it's changing. We have more and more authors, webinars, teachings, grief workshops happening in this country than ever before. And it is an indicator that very slowly cracks are forming in that crust that prevented the very beautiful, deep, hard work of sorrowing from being out in the open. We're going to walk with a few of our literary mentors this evening. And some may be very familiar to you, but some perhaps not. I really would say I'm not a guru in the world of grief. I just understand my own grief reasonably well. I'm not always pleased with it, and mostly I haven't invited it. Nonetheless, I've become very familiar with the voice of grief within me. And that has caused me to reach out and to adopt a number of literary mentors. And so we will touch base with some of them this evening. What I have to share is really the integration of these many, many authors, speakers, and 1,000 stories from people, stories from 1,000 people, I'm sure, that I've interacted with and walked with. And all of that has settled into me. And some of that will be shared this evening. David Kessler. I haven't always been a Kessler adherent. I'm changing my perspective on that with his works of late. And I like this as a starting place. Grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It's an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity, the price you pay for love. And get this, the only cure for grief is to grieve. And that's cheeky, and I like that. Kessler brings in a couple of prominent pieces that other authors in our mentorship have highlighted. And that includes Alan Wolfelt and Francis Weller and new for me, Lucy Hone and Megan Devine, Robert Romanishin, Robert Niemeyer, to mention a few. Almost all of them have something that says there's a relationship between love and grief. And some might phrase it as attachment to something and grief. Romanishin says grief is the price we pay for love and the path we walk to find ourselves again. And one of the things I'll highlight is that none of our mentors suggest that grief goes away, that there's some end to it, or that you get to graduate and be free of it. But they do all highlight that we will be changed by grief. What that change is going to look like, we don't necessarily know ahead of time. And they recognize grief as the kind of energy, experience, state of being that can utterly disassemble and reassemble us again. Weller says the marks of being human carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other. And he reiterates what the other mentors say. It's not a problem to be solved. And he adds, it's an experience that needs to be witnessed. And that witnessing is in part within ourselves, so that we bear witness to what we're experiencing, which takes raw courage. And also finding somebody we trust, somebody with whom we feel safe, to let that grief be seen and witnessed by them. There's no attribution for this quote, but I like it. Grief is the last act of love we can give to those we loved. And Sarah Kerr goes on to say, grief is the heart's response to love lost. And Wolfelt, grief is not a problem to be fixed, it's a journey to be traveled. We really get a sense from these authors that there's a commonality in the power of grief and its relationship to what has been taken from us. And I'll pause here for a moment just to give us a reminder that grief is not only evoked as a consequence of a death loss. Grieving is about loss, and the word change and loss are synonyms. Anytime there's a change in our life, something's gone from us. It might be a change that we want and that we've initiated. That doesn't mean, though, that it's not a loss. Not all change or loss evokes grief or significant grief. And non-death losses, the ending of a relationship, change in bodily function, moving from one community to another, the loss of safety or identity, all of these can evoke catastrophic loss for us and a deep, deep grief. And so when we see these statements, grief is the last act of love, that might be the last act of love about something that we lost that was not a death loss. I just want to very quickly look at 4 words with you, just so we have a common understanding of language. The word bereavement colloquially means somebody recently died. I am bereaved. My father died, my spouse died, whatever. It comes, though, from that Old English word berefian, which means to deprive of, take away, seize, rob. So it really can apply in the deeper sense to anything that we don't have anymore. You don't hear anybody say, I'm bereaved of my pickup truck, which was stolen. It would be weird, but not inappropriate in a technical sense. Alan Wolfelt is the one who gives us really clear direction on the word grief and the word mourning. And he says grief is an internal process. It's what I feel here. It's mine. It is my thoughts, my feelings. It's what my body is doing after a loss. And it's entirely possible for me to be so disconnected from myself that I don't realize it. I have had clients who said, my doctor said I need to come and see you, but I don't really know why. And then when they have told me the story of their life, it is replete with huge losses, death and non-death catastrophic losses. And they had no idea what they were feeling was grief. And it's also possible for us to know what we're feeling, but for the people around us to be unaware if we've kept it inside. Sorrow is the source of grieving in my language. It's a state of being when we experience a loss, a deep loss. And the experiences of grief are how we know that our state of being is changed. Sorrow is a fundamental human experience, like joy or creativity or compassion or love, and their shadow sides. Sorrow is what changes in here after a big loss. And then it is expressed through our whole being, and we'll take a quick peek at that in a moment, through the experiences of grief, the emotions, the thoughts, soulfully, physically. If you have grief experiences, then you know you're in a state of sorrow. So let's pause for a breath here with this question. And I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment. I ask us to consider, how do we know we're grieving? Like, well, what is it that's happening in us that would tell us, I'm in a state of sorrow because I'm experiencing this? And as I mentioned, I have had clients who were really not attuned to their own selves well or deeply and didn't realize that some of what they were experiencing was pure grief. So this question, how do we know we're grieving? What do our emotions tell us when we're grieving? What are our thoughts doing when we're grieving? What's our body telling us when we're grieving? To yourself, yeah, that's great. Feel free to stick stuff in the chat. That's really useful for us. It's an ache deep inside. I really like that. Are we able to welcome what grief is doing it in an experience with us? If we can, then that the answer to that question might come quickly for us. How do I know I'm grieving? Because I'm willing to welcome it within me. But if I'm not, if I'm scared of it, or if it threatens me, I might not welcome it. And that might prevent me from being really aware of grief as an experience within me. Culturally, we often exchange grieving, sorrowing, mourning, and that's fine, as though they're all the same thing. Wolfelt says, though, that grieving is how the world sees what's going on in me. It's how my sorrow is witnessed by others. It's influenced by so many things: cultural customs, personality, family, religious rituals, norms, my neurobiology. And so anything that can be seen externally by somebody around me would be an element of mourning. It's grief presenting itself to the world. Crying, journaling, storytelling, creating something, accessing supports, talking about the loss, praying, meditating, joining in ceremonies and rituals, even being playful, or remembering or recollecting. When we remember or recollect, we're bringing, especially in a death loss, we're bringing the loved one back into the room with us. We're bringing them back into membership in our village. We're going to just run through real quick, and then these examples of experiences of grief. I would encourage all of us to avoid calling them symptoms of grief, because the temptation there is to pathologize a quintessential human experience. Not to say that there aren't aspects of grieving and sorrowing that require various kinds of intervention and support, for sure, but it's not a disease. So, experiences and expressions of grief. I'm going to take a look at what it does to our body, our behaviors, our thoughts, our feelings, and the deepest part of ourselves. Those of you that have sat in on a version of this in the past will have seen some kind of slides like this before. Our whole body can be involved. I have had clients say to me, since so and so died, I get a rash all the time, or now my joints ache, or I get headaches, or I can't take a deep breath, or I feel nauseous, or I'm hungry all the time. I had a client who would wake up at 2 in the morning and eat a whole box of Oreos. And I said, are you concerned about this? And they said, well, I don't know why I'm doing this. What do you feel when you wake up in the night? I feel lonely. What does the eating do? It distracts me. I don't feel as lonely. I said, it sounds like it's a useful tool. They said, well, what should I do? I said, well, you have to manage your own body. Maybe it's not healthy to eat a box of Oreos every night. You might want to consider other options. It didn't last, of course. Sometimes we can't eat at all. Muscle pain, joint pain, restlessness. Like I can't sit still. Broken heart syndrome, where our our heart mimics a heart attack. And it can turn into a real heart attack. But there's evidence showing that there's something called broken heart syndrome, where the pain of our loss touches our physical heart so hard that it feels like the symptoms of a myocardial infarction, chest pain, sleep disturbances, loss of focus. I can't concentrate because of what's happening to my brain, which is going partly offline for a little while. Because what we feel and what we think, almost always a deep sense of sadness, sometimes numbness, especially in the weeks or months immediately following a catastrophic loss. And when that numbness begins to erode, the pain behind it can be so overwhelming. We don't honestly know if we can survive. We can, by the way, because our species is wired for this. We've been sorrowing for tens of thousands of years. So we have it in our DNA to navigate the waters of loss. But sometimes this thing is going to tell us we can't do it. We're not enough. We may have disbelief, irritability, detachment from life, from friends, from our intimate partner, from the things that we love to do, anger. We may have guilt or pseudo guilt. Pseudo guilt, by the way, is when the thing that we feel guilty about doesn't have anything to do with our moral path or our moral code. Guilt's always directly related to our moral code and stepping off that path. So sometimes we feel pseudo guilt. It feels like guilt, but it isn't about our morality. And it's usually about frustration that we couldn't change something or stuck between a rock and a hard place. Regret, yearning, feeling overwhelmed. There's social experiences, withdrawal from social activities, events, isolation, reassessment of our friends and activities, energy depletion, and soulful spiritual experiences. Despair, shattered faith. If we have some relationship with the Creator or God, can be angry at the institutions that represent our spirituality. And we might really be searching for some kind of meaning or purpose that comes out of this loss. That question of like, why did this happen? Or why me? Why them? Sometimes there's a very hard and deep searching in the midst of our grief. We don't always immediately find answers that are soothing. How we act almost always changes. Forgetfulness because of changes to our prefrontal cortex, temporary changes. If it's a death lost, we might be searching for the deceased. We have slowed thinking, dreams about the loss or the deceased. We might sense a loved one's presence in the dream world or next to us, and that can be comforting or not. A lot of aimless wandering and deep sighs. My wife will sometimes hear me sigh, and it always evokes, "Are you okay?" And I think it's just some sadness escaping out, a little bit of steam sadness, and it just needs to get out, and it comes out in a deep sigh. Some of our spiritual writers say a sigh is a prayer of the soul, wordless prayer. We might try not to talk about our loss because we don't want others to feel uncomfortable because of our cultural bias. And at the same time, we might have this great need to retell the story of the loss or our loved one's death or something about the loss because sorrow seeks to be witnessed. Because loss isn't just about a creature's death, human creature or an animal companion, because loss can be, like bodily function, identity, safety, village, friendships end, partnerships end. That complexity of loss means how we respond either within ourselves or to somebody we're supporting needs to look a bit different depending on the situation. In a little while, we'll go over some basics on universal supports. But before then, some of what we're going to be needing to do is sit with somebody who's had catastrophic news about themselves, a diagnosis. They came back from the doctor and they were diagnosed with a neurological disease or a late stage cancer, organ disease, whatever it is that they can't be healed, can't be cured. And on the day of their diagnosis, loss begins because their whole future changed. They walk away from the doctor's office with the confirmation of the test results. You have X, Y, and Z. It cannot be cured. It will kill you. And that's a catastrophic loss. And on that day, maybe it's fairly upstream. Maybe they're not going to actually die for a couple of years, let's say, in this scenario. But on that day, they lost something huge. But they can still go for a long walk and they can go fishing and they can paint and sing and do things that they love. But a year later, as the disease has progressed and their medicines have been hard on them, they can't walk as far and they have a lot of pain. And they realize another piece of life is carved away. And that's a new loss, a brand new loss. And 6 months later, they actually really can't walk even around the block. And they need a little help with their personal care. And they can't paint anymore and they don't go fishing. They don't even camp in the backcountry. And pretty soon they're at the last 6 weeks of their life and they're actively dying and they can't take care of themselves at all. And it's a whole new layer of loss. And then they will die. And their loved ones, their village, will begin to grieve and to mourn. In this palliative world, we acknowledge that the losses begin on the day we meet with the doctor to confirm test results, and those losses continue until our death. That's not a bad thing. It just means something's being taken from us. And at every part of that, we need somebody around us, that might be us in this room tonight, that knows how to bear witness and name loss. Here's what our culture has left behind that we seek to reclaim, to give words to the loss, and to create meaningful ritual to honor it. It can be simple ritual. The title might be Bill's diagnosis, the title of this book of loss. The chapters underneath are what take work to articulate. And whether it's a death loss or it's like a loss because of a diagnosis or something else, we can name the title. My mom died in 2021. The title of that book was Mom Died. The chapter titles are, I don't have that person to phone up and say, hey, Mom, what's that story about your sister again? So that's one of the losses under that title, right? The work is articulating the chapter titles underneath the main title. So when somebody's diagnosed, as they go along, new chapter titles are being added. I can't walk as far. And now I have a pain in my shoulder. I can't put my shirt on by myself. And if we're really attuned as supporters, we know we need to bear witness to that and listen to the pain of the loss, help articulate that loss if there's struggle, to name it. This sounds like it's a new loss for you. And to find a simple way to let ritual speak so that we create a spaciousness inside us. Even as we're being lost, having lost a body or ability or relationship, when we tell the story, what does that do? It creates spaciousness here for new parts of ourselves to grow, to deepen. I've got a couple of chats that I want to share. Those losses are grieved by them and their loved ones. Another grief is the members of the village that disappeared during the journey. You hear those chapter titles, right? We sit in a state of shock as we process this journey, however that looks for each of us. Yeah. And we might just barely be getting used to that shock when the next layer of loss comes in a palliative story, right? I just got used to the fact that I have the diagnosis, or now I can't do whatever I love doing. And I've kind of accepted that. And then suddenly there's a new layer of loss that I have to sit with. It's hard work. All right, so I'm going to screen share and introduce you to a longtime friend of mine. This friend taught me all about what transformation is actually about. And let us be clear here. I in no way seek to romanticize sorrowing. I think it's horrible. Um, I'm grateful for who I've become from my losses, and I acknowledge that I would rather not have had to go through sorrowing. Nonetheless, metamorphosis for all the creatures has unbelievable potential. I'm glad you get to meet me today. I'm by no means perfect or anything else, but I'm a far better human than 30 years ago. And I'm a far better human in my humble opinion because I had a long ways to go. And transformation is hard and painful, and it can be amazing. So let me screen share and introduce you to my good friend, the monarch caterpillar. Here you have the larval stage of a monarch butterfly. And this little guy goes up and down twigs and eats leaves and poops and hangs out in the sun. And in our story, this is you and me before we learn about a loss. This is our normal life, for good or ill, pleasant or unpleasant. We get it. We understand the vibe. One day, probably not by our choosing, a loss lands in our life. And on that very day, when the reality of that loss hits us, whatever it is, sorrow comes and wraps around us, cocoons around us. Now, I learned years ago when I was researching this that uh, butterfly caterpillars grow a chrysalis, and moth caterpillars grow a cocoon, weave a cocoon. So this is a butterfly, not a moth. And she is creating this chrysalis around herself. And once that's formed, she will disassemble inside in this absolutely completely natural and needed and horrific experience of disassembly. She'll basically be a pile of genetic goo at the bottom. In our story of loss, this is the time when, after a catastrophic loss, and sorrow is holding us so that we don't fling apart into the universe, we start to fall apart. Inside our sorrowing cocoon, our values, our perspectives, everything is in chaos. I can speak from my own loss and from the losses of the 1,000 people I've journeyed with that it's disorienting, frightening, overwhelming, exhausting when our whole person fragments. And even our body takes part in this, in the pains that we feel, the absolute exhaustion, because it's hard work to go through metamorphosis. Back to this creature for a moment. In the cocoon, she comes apart. And then, because nature's intent is not her destruction, nature begins to put her back together like Lego blocks, but in a different pattern. Same essential pieces, the same DNA, really different creature. So nature builds her back together until she completely fills up that space. In fact, she fills it up so much that if she does not emerge, she'll suffocate. Back to us sorrowers. We we start to regrow as well. After some months or a year or years, we grow back. We break apart a bit more, we grow back, it goes back and forth. But eventually, we too fill that sorrow cocoon. And at some point, if we have leaned into our loss, our grief, and there's the key, if we're doing the work, supported by our village, supported by our heart, if we do that, we get tired of being in this cocoon and we want to be back in life differently. And so we look out the bottom and we go, yeah, no, not yet. Maybe, maybe. So let's look what happens here. You can see her ready to emerge and vulnerable. It's like giving birth, hey? It's hard. It's hard to come back into the world. And she's going to come back in and she's not going to be anything like she was before. I mean, she went into this with 16 legs and she ate leaves. And she comes out and she's only got 4 legs. She sprouted wings and she has to suck nectar and fly. And there's no instruction manual. And as she hangs there in those first few moments, life is going to ask her something. Are you willing to be in the world differently? And if she is willing, well, she'll do what you see here. If she were to say to life, no, I'm not willing to be different, she would die there. So too for you and I, for you and me, for all of us. When we emerge from that sorrow cocoon, life is going to say, are you willing to be in the world without him, her, or it, whatever it is that's lost? Not do you want to. Clearly, we want to have the life that we used to have, but are you willing to be in the world different? And if we say yes, we have to discover, well, who am I now? What creature am I? What possibilities exist that didn't before? What deepening and ripening happened to me? How have I moved towards my elderhood because of this loss? What healing and gift does it give me to give to the world? If we say, no, I'm not willing to be in the world this way, then we'll die. Emotionally, physically, spiritually. It is not sorrow's intent that we die. It is sorrow's intent that we transform. That metaphor of the caterpillar, the cocoon, and the butterfly can be very useful for us on our own journey to say, I have a way now to frame where I'm at in this journey. I had this loss and I'm still disassembling. I'm in the chaos of this. I hate it. Or I'm in the chaos of it and I know I'll get through. Or maybe I'm here, I'm just ready to emerge. I had a griever with me one time said, Bill, I'm poking my head out the bottom of the cocoon. I said, how does that feel? She said, I'm frightened. Tell me about being frightened. She said, I knew who I was 2 years ago. I have no idea who I am now, but I want to be back in life. There's the reality. This metaphor can be useful when we're supporting somebody in grief. If it's an appropriate time, we might share this metaphor and they might find voice, words, images for their experience. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she presented a model of orderly stages of grief at end of life for the actively dying. It was usurped by grief theorists for years, and it looked like this. You have a loss, you go down to the bottom, you come back up, yeah, everything's good. Um, yeah, the problem with that is this is more of the lived experience of grievers. It's a frickin' mess. And we can feel like we've got it all together for a few weeks or maybe even a month after a catastrophic loss. And then suddenly it all crashes in again. And we say, I thought I was doing good. Well, we were. Metamorphosis is mucky. Doing good in metamorphosis means I've disassembled or I am disassembling and it's horrible. And doing good in metamorphosis means I'm starting to grow back together and it's hard. And it means I'm emerging and I'm scared. And it means I've started to fly and I feel wonder and uncertainty. And it means I've grown into my elderhood at a new level and I'm sitting with somebody who's going through this. And I sit quietly and my heart knows what it means to sorrow. And that's all mucky. Let's look at a couple of styles of grieving. And I would say by a long ways, this is not definitive of the possibility of grieving styles. However, it gives just a lovely spectrum of a viewpoint. All of this to say, by no means are tears and various emotional expressions the only way to mourn or to experience sorrowing. So let's say on one end of this spectrum is the intuitive or feeling style of grief energy. And I guess I would just say sorrow evokes a lot of energy moving around in us. And I don't necessarily mean that just woo-woo energy, for lack of a better term, but synaptic energy, just a ton of it, both woo-woo and synaptic. And that energy needs to move out somehow, right? Like if it stays in us, it's really corrosive. You can reference many studies on um, the effects of prolonged distress and how that can affect our neurobiology, our organs. And so grief fits into that space where if the energy of it is repressed or held inside, it's incredibly dangerous. And so it looks for opportunities to move. For the feeling griever, movement looks like emotion, intense waves of emotion and feeling, and moving forward in that metamorphosis means I got a lot of tears, I got a lot of anger, I got a lot of despair. We'll vent. And how we feel will almost always precede and dominate some kind of thinking or doing. And the primary feeling is going to be sadness and despair and that empty place of loss. So when this kind of griever needs to create some spaciousness in them and release that energy, they're going to do it primarily emotionally. 50% of men and 50% of women will present on this side of the spectrum, more likely to be grieving, feeling grievers. On the other side of the spectrum, and by the way, you can be anywhere on this spectrum. You can be here for one loss and over here for another loss. There's literally no rules. Or maybe this won't apply to you at all. You might have a different style altogether. On the other side of this spectrum is the thinking or doing style. Again, this person, their sorrow generates this energy and it needs to move out of them. They are more likely to have that energy moved out through thinking processes. Their feelings are there, but they're not as intense or as obvious. They're more focused on problem solving or action, and being physical will always precede and dominate a feeling. It doesn't mean they don't care. It's just how does the energy come out? For one person, it comes out emotionally. For another, it comes out being active or doing. So this kind of griever might clean the house or go for a run or bake or build an engine or focus intensely on something. 50% of males, 50% of females are this kind of griever. Culturally, our culture in Canada, this presents a problem because we would say women should grieve by tears, men should grieve by being stoic or by doing something. So when we have a female who's a thinking griever, she may feel very invalidated. And I think of the widow who said to me, Bill, I haven't cried since my husband died a month ago. I said, oh, well, how is that for you? And she said, I feel so guilty. It was actually pseudo guilt. I feel so guilty that I think I'm dishonoring him. So I told her the story of these two grieving styles in this spectrum. Then she cried. She cried and cried. She said, oh my goodness, I've cleaned the house top to bottom every day since he died. Was I grieving? I said, yes, you were grieving. When we see a man who's a strong feeling griever, and it's let's say it's a death loss, and at the graveside he falls apart and just cries and cries, and then for the next year he cries and cries, and everybody thinks he needs to get fixed. There's something wrong with him, and he even thinks it. I'm depressed. One man whose wife died said to me, Bill, I'm afraid I'm depressed. I described experiences of grieving. Do you have these? Yes. Did your wife die? Yes. Are you grieving? Yes. You're not depressed. You're a man who's a feeling griever. It is helpful for us who are supporting somebody in grief to have an idea of where that person is on this spectrum and to just acknowledge, at least to ourselves, that what we see happening in them is their grief energy moving out. And for one person, regardless of their gender expression, it's going to be the energy of emotion. And for another, it'll be the energy of movement. And both are valid and important for that person. There's a few myths. The pain of loss will go away faster if you ignore it. That's a cultural myth. That's bullshit. It doesn't go away faster if you ignore it. If you sedate it with alcohol or work or anything, it just holds it down for a while and it will pop up. Metamorphosis will do its work. It's important to be strong in the face of loss. Well, there's a thing, hey? For moms, for dads, for our partners, any of us should be strong. Well, I don't disagree with that. It's just that the definition of strong usually means repressing or suppressing what we feel. And that is not helpful. Being strong, truly strong, is to lean into the pain of our loss. It is to welcome what arises, to hold space for it internally, and then to do the good work of mourning with our village, finding somebody we trust, to hold that story. Tears are the only sign of grief? Nah. Grief is an illness and it's dysfunctional? No. It's due to lack of spirituality. I think the most spiritually thing we can do is to do the deep human work of sorrowing in our own way, giving ourselves permission to say yes and no to what is needed, to find our own myths, our own language, our own metaphors, to end relationships or begin them, to be that gopher that pokes out of the hole in the summer, very, very carefully looking for hawks and coyotes, not fully coming out until they ascertain I can be in this space. That's sorrow. It does that. It peeks out of the hole and it says, am I truly safe in this moment with this person? And if it doesn't feel safe, it doesn't come out. Children should be protected from grief. What a wildly inappropriate thing. A British study of teenagers who'd had a parent die revealed that 10 years after the fact, the children that were openly mentored in sorrowing were on a path of transformation, a positive transformation. And the children that were not mentored, that were protected or repressed or held back from the world of grief and sorrow, had a higher incidence of interactions with the law, with drugs, with alcohol, with self-abuse. Friends can be supportive by not bringing up the subject of whatever that loss is. That's complicated, but it's not true. Friends will be open to the conversation of the loss when the griever wants it to come forward. And they may be bold and just say, how are you doing today? You have my compassion. I highly encourage all of us to avoid saying, I know just what you're going through. My dog also had to get put down last week or a year ago, and I know exactly what that's like. Somebody died. I had that kind of a diagnosis. Well, what you know is what you felt in those losses, and you know how you were, but you do not know what this other person's going through. Even if the details are almost identical, you're not them. We can never accurately say, I know what somebody else is going through. Best to take that one off our list. You must be ... So angry, sad, lonely. You must. When we say you must, we are instructing somebody how to be. And I hear it all the time in movies and sitcoms and in the news and the people around me. Oh, you must be so tired. Why must I? It is a part of our colloquial language that is really undesirable. Another one, this is hard, but, and that's similar to at least. When we say but or at least, we're basically telling the griever that we're not interested in how they're experiencing their loss, and we're trying to put a bright spin on it. At least they're no longer in pain. At least they can have another baby. At least you can look for another job. At least your left arm still works. It's a diminishing piece. What it does is it doesn't create safety for that sorrowing gopher to pop up. It puts a foot print on top of the gopher hole and says, I don't want you to come up. So then, a legitimate question I asked myself, what do I say? Well, how about this one to start with? I don't care whether it's death or non-death loss. Just, I'm sorry for your loss. I really am. This sucks. Any of us can do that. We could say to that person, look them in the eye, hold their hand if it's appropriate, whatever. Just say, I'm sorry for your loss. Or how about this? You have my compassion. And that word compassion means to suffer with, but not to take it on as my suffering. To suffer with in a way that might relieve suffering, to journey alongside of. You have my compassion. How about, I'm sad to hear about whatever the loss was. I'm sad to hear about your diagnosis. I'm sad with you. It's not your job to make them feel better. It's actually our job walking alongside our loved ones at home or professionally to bear witness, to see them, to hear them, to be that rare human beside them that won't try to make it better or fix them or tell them that any of 1,000 platitudes. Our job really, truly, deeply as a human, as an elder in training, I'm here with you. That's all. We could ask, what's this been like for you? Because we don't know. I don't know how your loss is. And maybe they'll tell you. And then finally, maybe what we say is nothing. Maybe we offer silence and presence, hold their tears. Or if they're a doer, maybe we go for a run with them or just bake in the kitchen. So for us who grieve, a few tools. Lucy Hone says, ask, is this whatever action, thought, perspective? Is it helping me or harming me? Sometimes there comes a time to say, am I clinging to this suffering? And if so, how is that growing me? Megan Devine says, use grounding techniques for emotional and physical regulation, according to our own interests and our story. Explore creative expression. Engage community supports with others who get grief. Create boundaries that reduce unnecessary suffering from others' expectations. Alan Wolfelt says, lean on the Mourner's Bill of Rights. And you could Google that, the Mourner Bill of Rights that he wrote. And there's, if it's 7 or 10 ideas that he says, we have the right as grievers to be in this way. Sarah Kerr, explore soul care activities or ways of being. Design and make use of ritual and ceremony in your life. David Kessler says, engage commemorations, anniversaries, explore gratitude. And he's with Weller on that. And do community rituals. And then a few others have said, keep a dream journal or exercise, respecting your energy. And all of them, in some way, in their own language, say, lean into your grief. Without judgment, just feel what you feel, think what you feel, what you think. I'm just respectful of the time, and I want to leave some time for Q&A. And so I'm going to let you take a peek at these next slides um, through the slide deck that I'm sending you. And there's also, yeah, no, I got to rescind that thought. Anyway, I will touch base on this quick. I had mentioned this grief energy. Any electrical energy needs to ground to the earth to create a circuit. Grief energy looks for a grounding point to move, i.e., something that reminds us of the loss, a picture, an aroma, a memory, an action, a certain kind of person. I'm often a grounding place for my clients, and they feel safe. And so as soon as they are in conversation with me, there may be an expression of grief energy. The temptation is to avoid those grounding places because it can be painful when grief moves in us, frightening or unsettling. It's also really, really important because every time a bit of that energy moves out, we create some spaciousness within us. And we finish with Francis Weller's idea of, Alan Wolfeld's idea of companioning the bereaved. And that word companioning comes from the Latin com, together, and panis, bread, to break bread together or to be a messmate or a table mate. So when we're companioning, we're walking alongside in that sitting at the table kind of way of being with each other. It asks that we bear witness, that we don't attempt to fix, and that we set judgment aside. And he gives us these 11 ideas that it is about being present to each other's pain. It's not about taking it away. About the wilderness of the soul, journeying into and not necessarily finding a way out together. Honoring the spirit. It's not about intellect. He says it's about listening with the heart, not about analyzing with the head, and about bearing witness to the struggles of others, not judging or directing them, walking alongside. As a supporter, it's not my job to lead or even be led. I'm just asked to journey with, discovering the sacred gifts of silence. We don't need words. Sometimes they're really good, really useful and supportive. Often they get in the way. And with that goes that sense of being still, respecting disorder and confusion, and not needing to make a straight and even line out of it. And these last two go together. That idea that I'm here to learn from you what your journey is. And I do that with a gentle curiosity. You'll get these slides again in your emailing. And so there's a couple of great websites that you can check out as a griever or as a supporter. A small curated list that we trust at Bow Valley, and also our contact information. So if you want to learn more about presentations like this or chat with me, you can do that through the info at email, and our main line is listed there for phoning. And with that, thank you.